Eraserhead is one of those films I look back still to this day, and I can safely say it's still one of the more bizarre films I've watched on this channel. Trying to interpret this film seems to be a little bit more difficult because if I'm being honest with you, I feel like every interpretation can be correct. David Lynch, I think, does a brilliant job with describing how this film really is, and that is something of a dream. Looking back on it, especially with the filmmaking that it uses, it makes a lot more sense how no matter what you derive from it, instead of a direct path, you are more likely to almost acquire a spiral. I mean, we literally see something like this within the overall entire story arc of Eraserhead. Nothing makes sense, but yet things try to make sense, if that makes sense. I feel like any angle you try to look into this film can be correct. So with that being said, what is the overall point of Eraserhead? What is the interpretation that, even amongst its ambiguity, still begs to be interpreted? We can start picking up a little bit of these clues within Eraserhead, looking at its themes, or maybe even just the surface of its theme. And at least to me, one of those happens to be that of anxiety. Personally, anxiety is one of those things that I am familiar with, and at the very same time, I am unfamiliar with. The best way I can describe it is that obviously if I'm in a situation, or even when I'm watching a film such as Eraserhead, I can feel the anxiousness, I can feel anxiety within my body, but then there's other moments where I don't really know what the feeling is. I can tell that it's tethered to anxiety, but I don't really understand the presence of it. In other words, it's sort of like a dream, something that you are vaguely familiar with, foundations within your life, but they all seem scrambled. David Lynch himself saying that this film was one of his more spiritual films he's made, I completely understand it. You look at these events and you look at these frames, it's like a blank canvas, yet there still seems to be color there, ironically, even though it's in black and white. It's great when I can go into a film that just allows me to interpret, to almost walk around freely and allow my thoughts to just be at an all-time high when it comes to scrambled. Another way that I can describe this is how sometimes directors or cinematographers, they use a long frame, a long shot, maybe holding it in on something. For example, if I were to open my eye and all you see within the beginning of this film is just an eye opening up, and it holds that frame for about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, it gets to a point to where your mind is going to try and figure out what is happening. Why are we holding on to this frame? And those thoughts that start to scramble off, break into pieces, that I think flow a little bit more into your psyche, to where now you're interpreting the shot into a multitude of things. All of this being done unconsciously. This really does parallel well with what David Lynch is saying for when people who try to interpret this or try to make sense of this, and basically him just saying that any interpretation is right. This is the pit where all minds equal one another. Now I want to preface this by also making it very clear that this video in itself is going to be heavily off of the reaction that I did when I first witnessed Eraserhead. Again, I highly recommend watching the film yourself, but if you would like to also watch it with someone else, I actually watched it on the channel for the first time. So by all means, check out the video, then come back to this. It's going to make a little bit more sense. Going back to what I said about anxiety, I think Eraserhead embodies that. I think Eraserhead is one of those films that is able to showcase how the external effects, maybe even the internal effects of our environment, maybe the pressures of the world around us, whether we can control them or not, how they seep into our thoughts, how they seep into our dreams. This works really well for someone who is watching this for the first time because it comes off as extremely jarring. You can see that even within some of the compositions of this film. Everything makes sense, but nothing really makes sense. Filling up the frame with windows and giant concrete walls where we can't even see the sky, making our character feel so small and so abstract within something that should be in full control of himself. However, it seems that as time goes on and as his film goes on, he loses more control. Again, looking back at some of these scenes, Henry, our main character, it makes a little bit more sense now when you look at it from the lens of something that is a dream-like or someone's anxiety making their way into the subconscious as they sleep and inhabit those dreams. Having a child can be very, very difficult. As much as it is inspiring and very, very much a proud moment within a human's life, it can very much be, due to whatever circumstance, be someone's greatest fear. We see Henry adopt those fears amongst with this child, and as time goes on and he tries to figure things out within this dream where you should have a lot of control in, we see this child grow even more abstract as time goes on. I could go the angle about how Henry maybe sees his child or this baby that's within his dream as disgust because of how grotesque this film can really be, and that could be an interpretation. However, it could just be a disgust within himself, a disgust for maybe the disdain he has for this child and how this child seems to be taking over his entire life. One of my favorite scenes within this film is actually the "in heaven everything is fine" scene. Not only do I personally think it goes super hard, like honestly the organs, all of it. However, I think looking at it a little bit more now, it could be an interpretation of a way out. And I'm not talking about, a way out of his dream. I'm talking about a way out of his reality. Almost hoping that somewhere out there in heaven, there's this cozy place where none of this, all of this weight can finally evaporate, where everything is fine. This brings a lot more insight into the overall title of Eraserhead. Hoping to erase something, hoping to disappear and not have to look back at what you are. Obviously, this is the very thing in life that we can't do, but it is a fear, it is an anxiety, and it is a feeling that we all wish that we've had. Where we can go back and erase something, where we can go back and maybe do something differently. And those fears, those inabilities linger within ourselves and seep into our subconsciousness enough to warp our dreams and manifest those fears and that anxiety. Another thing that I think David Lynch does extremely well, now looking back on Eraserhead, is that of sound. The moment we are introduced to this world, sound is a presence. Looking back, I remember thinking if the sound design came more from the environment, whereas now within context of everything, the sound is the environment. The best way I can describe this is like, think about the back rooms. You know about those humming lights that seem to never go off, and it just creates this sense of uneasiness when you're in a liminal space such as the back rooms? It's something along those lines. This constant sound that lingers throughout the entire film doesn't die down. Again, at first I interpreted it as maybe the industrialism that was around, but it quite literally could be the reality that Henry, our main character, is probably surrounded by within his actual reality. Another thing that I think David Lynch does extremely well is just the overall imagery. Now, obviously, that's not too hard to digest and to interpret. However, there are a little bit more things that I do want to, maybe touch on. For example, the bricks outside of the window, the flower pots that don't have a vase around them, there's just dirt. And then you have the composition of frames. A lot of the compositions, again, if you look at it from the lens of this being a dream, beg to be looked at even deeper because they are the embodiment of whatever our character Henry is feeling. When he's at the dinner table with the family, that composition is tight. It's a tight frame. And Henry is all alone off to his side, off to his corner. It's suffocating. I feel like these frames and these compositions are meant to make us feel uncomfortable, are meant to portray a feeling that we can't escape, even within our dreams. That something is just a little off, and when something is grotesque, you will definitely find out. Another way that David Lynch uses the camera to inhabit those fears and that anxiety and everything that we talked about is how the camera moves. Throughout this film, we are shown a very dreamlike glide that the camera does when following our character. For a film as weird and chaotic as this, the filmmaking, or at least the camera movement, doesn't depict that. It keeps its seamlessness, it keeps its smooth transitioning, so that way we can see fully all the horrors, all the anxieties, and all the fears without any falter. Unlike handheld, we have absolutely no control over this camera. We have absolutely no control over this dream. Looking back on Eraserhead, the camera actually entices us to look, almost as if being led by something you can't evade or you can't get out of. The camera buckles you down and it literally shows you exactly what is happening, no matter how weird, no matter how anxious, no matter how scary and grotesque things get. The camera is always going to show you showing and not telling. This is another thing that I think is done brilliantly within Eraserhead, is that, again, just like we talked about, this unwavering camera that is like pushing us towards this ledge, we are shown things. We are not told anything either. We have nothing but our mind and our eyes to bear witness to what's happening. All of this in context, and you put it within the relationship of our main character, Henry, then I think you start to realize why this was probably done, why this relation and why this film was shown to us the way that it was. And I feel like it is to bridge that connection, this very same feeling from Henry, the main character, to us, the audience. Again, this film, for me, feels like anxiety, something that I am familiar with yet unfamiliar with, where I'm either given an option of staying within this nightmare, this dream, this abstraction, or I take the other option, which is to end it all. I think the duality between these two thoughts and within collision of one another creates the landscape, creates the foundation, and creates the canvas for Eraserhead. I think David Lynch did a wonderful job at being the painter that he is when it came to painting Eraserhead. With that being said, David Lynch was one of the greatest directors of all time, and it's still such a blessing to be able to find the art, to find the passion, and find the joy, even the anxiety within his work. The fascination, the wonders, the horror. I hope that we can embody something like that again. But something tells me we won't be able to feel a one-of-a-kind soul like David Lynch. So again, I hope that you guys can go off and be inspired, and I hope that you guys can find out what it is that you would like to create. No matter how crazy, no matter how anxious, at the end of the day, I think it's worth it. So with that being said, I appreciate y'all. I appreciate you, David Lynch. And guys,